Events like these are for actual authors, not stupid amateurs, Professor Davis sneered, his words cutting through the ambient chatter of the Philadelphia Literary Festival. Shouldn't you be working on improving your grammar somewhere instead of pretending to belong here? I stood frozen, clutching my festival pass as the familiar humiliation washed over me. 11 years had passed since I sat in his Creative Writing 301 class, but Professor Robert Davis hadn't changed. Same wire-rimmed glasses, same condescending tone, same ability to make me feel 2 inches tall. I have every right to be here, I managed to say, though my voice came out smaller than intended. He snorted, looking down at me over those glasses. Just because you bought a ticket doesn't mean you belong among literary professionals. Some people simply lack the intellectual capacity for serious writing, as I believe I made clear to you in college. Several nearby attendees turned to watch our exchange, their curious expressions adding to my discomfort. I felt heat creep up my neck as I realized this confrontation was becoming a spectacle. My name is Mary Winters, and at 31, I've spent the last decade trying to prove Professor Davis wrong. After he publicly eviscerated my writing in his class and told me I was too dumb to ever be a published author, I nearly abandoned my dream completely. But instead, I channeled that humiliation into determination, writing at dawn before my day job and late into the night until my novel, The Midnight Shores, was complete. The irony that we were both attending the same literary festival wasn't lost on me. But while I knew why I was here, I didn't expect him to remember me, let alone continue his crusade to destroy my confidence all these years later. You should stick to reading books, not dreaming of writing them, he added with a dismissive wave. Some people simply don't have what it takes. As he turned away, I caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. The festival organizer, Josephine Barrett, was walking directly toward us with purpose in her stride. My heart raced. This confrontation was about to get much worse than I realized. Growing up in a small Pennsylvania town, books had always been my escape. My mother, a librarian, filled our home with stories, and I started writing my own by age 8. My childhood journals were filled with elaborate tales of adventure and mystery. Despite my early passion, writing never came easily to me. I struggled with dyslexia, making the technical aspects of writing a constant battle. When I earned a scholarship to attend the prestigious Eastwood University in Philadelphia, I believed it was my chance to develop my craft under the guidance of renowned professors. Professor Davis was a literary critic whose opinion could make or break careers. His creative writing seminar was selective, and being admitted felt like validation that my dream wasn't foolish. That illusion shattered during my first semester. While Davis praised the natural talent of other students, he seemed to take personal offense at my struggles. He would read my assignments aloud, his voice dripping with mockery as he highlighted every flaw. This is what happens when someone without basic comprehension skills attempts literature, he once announced to the class. I worked harder than anyone, spending countless hours in the writing center and meeting with tutors. I submitted and resubmitted assignments, desperate for even the faintest praise. Instead, Davis gave me a D in the course with a final note. Consider a career that doesn't require intellectual depth or language mastery. Despite his cruelty, some part of me still craved his approval. I believed that someone with his experience must be right, that perhaps I truly didn't have what it took. After graduation, I moved to New York, working as an administrative assistant at a publishing house while quietly continuing to write. When my manuscript was rejected 27 times, Davis's words echoed in my mind. But on the 28th submission, an editor saw potential. The first warning signs that Davis's assessment might be wrong came when my debut novel received a glowing review in the New York Times. Then came the sales numbers, the international rights deals, and finally, the call from my agent about the film adaptation. With each success, the grip of Davis's criticism loosened slightly, but never completely vanished. I hadn't planned to attend the same festival as him. My publicist had arranged my appearance months ago, keeping certain details under wraps at my request. I'd wanted to arrive quietly, without fanfare. Now, watching him dismiss me once again, I wondered if I would ever escape the shadow of his judgment. There you are, Mary. I've been looking everywhere for you, Josephine called out, her voice carrying across the crowded atrium. My heart sank as Davis turned back toward us, his eyebrows raised with mild interest. The production team needs you for a sound check, and the photographer from the Philadelphia Inquirer is waiting, she continued, either oblivious to or ignoring the tension between us. We should really get you backstage before the crowd realizes you're out here. Davis's expression shifted from dismissive to confused, as Josephine, the festival's executive director, took my elbow with the deference typically reserved for literary celebrities. I'm sorry, is there some confusion? Davis interrupted, forcing a smile. This is a former student of mine, certainly not someone who needs a sound check. Josephine looked between us, bewildered. Professor Davis, right? I believe you're scheduled for the academic panel tomorrow. She turned back to me. Mary, we really should hurry. The VIP reception starts in 20 minutes, and you still need to meet with the introduction team. The color drained from Davis's face as understanding began to dawn. Wait, you don't mean... Oh, I'm sorry. I assumed you knew, Josephine said brightly. Mary Winters is our keynote speaker. Her novel has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 28 weeks now. We're absolutely thrilled she agreed to headline the festival this year. The shock on Davis's face was so profound, it might have been comical under different circumstances. His mouth opened and closed without sound as he processed this information. Several onlookers, recognizing me now that Josephine had said my name, began to whisper excitedly. You're... the Mary Winters? He finally managed, his voice suddenly stripped of its earlier condescension. The validation I had craved for so long was finally within reach. Yet as I stood there, watching him recalibrate everything he thought he knew about me, I felt strangely hollow. His opinion, which had dominated my thoughts for years, suddenly seemed insignificant against the weight of what I had accomplished despite him. Yes, Professor Davis, the very same student you said was too stupid to write a shopping list, let alone a novel, I replied, my voice steady but quiet. If you'll excuse me, it seems I have a keynote address to prepare. As Josephine led me away, I caught a glimpse of Davis's stunned expression, now tinged with the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic misjudgment. For years, I had imagined this moment would bring triumphant satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and lingering doubt. Despite all the external validation, the sales, the reviews, the film deal, a small part of me still heard his voice in my moments of writer's block, still questioned whether I truly deserved my success. Walking toward the VIP area, I realized that confronting Davis was only the beginning. The real challenge would be confronting the lasting impact of his words on my own self-perception. The VIP lounge buzzed with literary elites, authors whose work had shaped my childhood, editors from prestigious publishing houses, and critics whose reviews could make or break careers. As Josephine introduced me around, I forced myself to appear calm despite the turmoil inside me. The encounter with Davis had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Mary, I wanted to apologize for that awkward moment earlier, Josephine said, as she handed me a glass of champagne. I had no idea about your history with Professor Davis. It's fine, I assured her, though it wasn't. Ancient history. Well, not to worry. He's relatively unimportant in the grand scheme of the festival, just participating in a panel on academic approaches to contemporary literature. You, on the other hand. She gestured to a large poster displaying my book cover and photo. You're our star. As we spoke, I noticed Davis entering the lounge, now wearing a VIP badge. My stomach tightened. Of course, he was still faculty at Eastwood, still carried enough literary credentials to warrant VIP status, even if he was a minor participant. He spotted me immediately and, after a moment's hesitation, began walking in my direction. The self-satisfied smirk that had haunted my college years was gone, replaced by an ingratiating smile that felt equally insincere. Mary, what an incredible surprise, he exclaimed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I always knew you had extraordinary potential. The blatant lie knocked the wind from me. Nearby, a well-known novelist raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing the tension. That's not how I remember our interactions, Professor, I said quietly. Oh, you misunderstood my teaching methods, he continued smoothly. I'm tough on the students I believe in. I push them harder. I recognized your raw talent immediately. Each word felt like a fresh betrayal. He wasn't just denying his cruelty. He was attempting to claim credit for my success. Before I could respond, Josephine was called away to handle a situation at the entrance, leaving me alone with my former tormentor. I'd love to catch up properly, Davis continued, lowering his voice. Perhaps discuss featuring your journey in my upcoming book about nurturing literary talent. I'm including a chapter on my former students who found success. Your story would make an excellent centerpiece. The audacity was breathtaking. For a moment, I considered creating a scene, calling out his lies in front of the assembled literary world. But something stopped me. The realization that public confrontation would only feed the narrative that I was still seeking his approval. I think that would be inappropriate considering your actual assessment of my abilities, I replied. His smile faltered slightly. Water under the bridge. We both know how the teaching relationship works. Sometimes pressure creates diamonds. He leaned closer. Between us, having my name associated with your success would benefit us both. You'd gain literary credibility beyond commercial success, and I'd expand your reputation, I finished for him. At my expense. A flash of his true nature, irritation, calculation, crossed his face before the mask slipped back into place. You should consider my offer carefully, Mary. The literary world is small, and influential voices matter. The implied threat hung in the air between us. He was suggesting that he could damage my literary reputation if I didn't play along with his revisionist history. It was the same intimidation tactic he'd used to silence my complaints in college. As he excused himself to network with other guests, I realized that simply succeeding wasn't enough. Davis wasn't going to acknowledge his wrongdoing. He was going to try to weaponize my success for his own benefit. The validation I'd sought for years was transforming into a new battle, and I had no idea how to fight it. The first hour of the VIP reception passed in a blur, as I mechanically chatted with admirers and fellow authors while keeping one eye on Davis. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping to speak with influential editors and critics. Several times I caught him gesturing subtly in my direction during these conversations. He's telling everyone he mentored you, came a voice at my elbow. I turned to find Catherine Bennett, an author I deeply admired, watching Davis with undisguised contempt. You know him? I asked. Unfortunately. He was my colleague at Princeton before moving to Eastwood. She sipped her wine. He's taking credit for your work, you know. I've already heard him tell the fiction editor at The Atlantic that he guided your early development, and saw promise when no one else did. My blood ran cold. That's the opposite of what happened. I figured as much. Robert has a habit of retroactively discovering talent. Catherine's eyes narrowed. He did the same with James Harlow last year, claiming he'd been an early champion of James's work. James was too conflict-averse to contradict him. And people believe him? Academia runs on reputation and connections. Robert knows that associating himself with successful former students enhances his status, whether the association is real or not. As she spoke, I noticed Josephine approaching with a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit. Mary, there's someone important I'd like you to meet, Josephine said. This is William Foster, the film producer who's adapting your novel. I extended my hand, but before Foster could speak, Davis materialized beside us. William, wonderful to see you again, Davis said, clapping the producer on the shoulder with unexpected familiarity. Foster looked momentarily confused but returned the greeting. Robert, wasn't expecting to see you here. I wouldn't miss seeing my former protege's big moment, Davis replied, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. Mary's talent was evident from her first assignment in my class. I still have her early work, showed such promise. I stiffened, but before I could contradict him, Foster's expression brightened with interest. Really? That's fascinating. We're in early stages of development, and I'd love to understand the genesis of Mary's unique voice. He turned to me. Mary, you never mentioned Professor Davis was your mentor. Because he wasn't, I began, but Davis smoothly interrupted. She's being modest. Mary was one of my most memorable students. In fact, I'm currently writing about her development in my book on literary pedagogy. Foster seemed intrigued. We should talk. The studio is planning a substantial marketing campaign around the film, and the story behind the story is always compelling. Davis beamed. I'd be happy to share my insights. In fact, I've been consulting on several literary adaptations recently. The conversation continued, with Davis skillfully positioning himself as an authority on my work and creative process. The room seemed to spin around me as I realized what was happening. Davis was not only trying to rewrite our history, but actively leveraging my success to advance his own interests with the film producer. As they exchanged contact information, I caught sight of a familiar face across the room, Jason Miller, who had been my actual mentor during my time at the publishing house. The person who had believed in me when no one else did, who had helped me reshape my manuscript and find my voice. In that moment, everything crystallized. Davis hadn't changed. He was still the same manipulative, credit-stealing opportunist he'd always been. But now his tactics threatened something much larger than my college GPA. He was attempting to insert himself into my career, my story, my achievement. The realization struck me like a physical blow. The professor who had nearly destroyed my confidence was now trying to profit from the success I'd achieved despite him. And if I didn't act decisively, his version of events would become the accepted narrative. The revelation about Davis's machinations galvanized me. As the reception continued, I discreetly spoke with Jason, explaining the situation in hushed tones. "This doesn't surprise me," Jason muttered. "Davis tried something similar with another writer I work with. He's made a career out of claiming credit for others' success. I need to stop him before he convinces everyone he's responsible for my career," I said. "But a public confrontation would make me look petty or desperate." Jason thought for a moment. "You have something he doesn't. Evidence. Do you still have any of his feedback from college?" A memory flashed through my mind. The portfolio I'd kept of all my college writing, including Davis's scathing critiques. I'd preserved it not out of nostalgia, but as motivation, a reminder of what I was fighting to disprove. Those red-inked pages contained ample evidence of his true assessment of my abilities. "I have everything," I confirmed, "but how do I use it without looking like I'm seeking revenge?" "You're giving the keynote tomorrow. It's the perfect platform," Jason suggested. "Not for revenge, but for honesty about your journey." I began formulating a plan, but as I scanned the room, I realized Davis had vanished, along with William Foster. A quick inquiry revealed they had left together, Foster apparently fascinated by Davis's insights into my creative process. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare for my keynote. As I approached the green room, I heard Davis's voice from inside. Fundamentally changed her approach after my guidance. The techniques I emphasized in my advanced seminar are evident throughout the novel, particularly in the third act. I paused outside the door, listening as Davis held court with several festival organizers and what sounded like a journalist. "So you recognized her talent early on?" a woman asked. "Absolutely. While rough around the edges, her potential was clear to me. I took a special interest in her development." "That's not how Mary described your relationship when we interviewed her last year," the journalist replied, skepticism evident in her tone. "She mentioned struggling with confidence after harsh criticism from a professor." "A common misunderstanding," Davis countered smoothly. "Rigorous critique is often misconstrued as harshness by developing writers. The proof is in the results. Look at her success now." I'd heard enough. Pushing open the door, I found Davis seated with a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, 2 festival board members, and Josephine. Their conversation halted abruptly at my entrance. "Mary, we were just discussing your remarkable journey," Davis said, not missing a beat. "I was sharing how rewarding it's been to see your growth since your time in my class." The reporter studied my face, clearly noting my reaction. "Is that an accurate characterization of your relationship, Ms. Winters?" All eyes turned to me. This was the moment to expose Davis publicly, to call out his lies and manipulation. Yet something held me back. A direct accusation would create drama that would overshadow the festival and my keynote. It would make the story about him rather than my work. "Professor Davis certainly had an impact on my development," I said carefully. "I'll be discussing that in detail during my keynote." Davis smiled smugly, interpreting my response as capitulation. The reporter seemed unsatisfied, but made a note. "If you'll excuse us, I need to speak with Mary about the schedule," Josephine interjected, sensing tension. As the others filed out, Davis lingered. "Wise choice, Mary," he murmured. "I look forward to your speech." After he left, Josephine turned to me with concern. "Is everything all right? You seemed uncomfortable." I hesitated, then made a decision. "Actually, I'd like to make a small change to the introduction for my keynote," I said. "And I'd need to display some additional materials during my talk." Josephine looked curious but nodded. "Of course. What did you have in mind?" As I outlined my revised approach, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't going to confront Davis directly. I was going to tell my story, the complete truth, and let the evidence speak for itself. He expected me to either publicly attack him or silently comply. Instead, I would do something he never taught me. I would find a third option. The main hall of the Philadelphia Convention Center was packed with nearly 1,000 attendees when I stepped onto the stage. Under the bright lights, I could make out Davis sitting prominently in the third row, an expectant smile on his face. Beside him sat William Foster, the film producer, along with several influential literary critics. "It is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker," Josephine began. "Mary Winters, whose debut novel, The Midnight Shores, has captivated readers worldwide, spending 28 consecutive weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Her work has been praised for its authentic voice, emotional depth, and technical virtuosity. Please welcome Mary Winters." The applause washed over me as I approached the podium. My heart raced, but not from stage fright. I had rehearsed this speech dozens of times, but never with the modifications I had made just hours before. "Thank you for that kind introduction," I began. "Today, I'd like to talk about the journey that brought me here, the full, unvarnished truth of it." The slides behind me shifted to display the cover of my novel, followed by a series of glowing reviews. Success like this doesn't happen in isolation. It takes mentors, supporters, and sometimes obstacles that force you to develop resilience. I clicked to the next slide, which displayed a scanned image of a college paper covered in red ink. Davis's unmistakable handwriting filled the margins with comments like, "hopelessly amateurish," and "perhaps consider a less intellectual pursuit." This was my final assignment in creative writing 301 at Eastwood University, along with my professor's assessment that I was, and I quote, "too intellectually limited to ever succeed as a writer." A murmur rippled through the audience. I didn't need to look at Davis to know his expression had changed. This professor continued to tell me throughout the semester that I lacked basic comprehension skills, that my writing showed no promise, and that I should abandon my literary aspirations entirely. I clicked through several more examples of his feedback, each more devastating than the last. The final slide showed his course evaluation. "D student lacks fundamental talent and would be better served pursuing a career that doesn't require intellectual depth or language mastery." Yesterday, that same professor approached me at this festival, offering to include me in his book about students he had mentored to success. He has been telling people here that he recognized my talent early and guided my development. The room had fallen completely silent, From the corner of my eye, I could see William Foster leaning away from Davis, his expression troubled. I'm sharing this not out of bitterness or a desire for revenge, but because the story of how we overcome obstacles matters. For years, I internalized these assessments. I believed I was too stupid to write, that my voice didn't matter, that I shouldn't even try. I paused, meeting Davis's gaze directly for the first time. His face had drained of color. What changed wasn't my intelligence or ability. What changed was finding people who believed in me despite the voices telling me I wasn't enough. The screen shifted to photos of the people who had actually supported me. Jason, my editor, my writing group, my mother. These are my true mentors. They didn't tear me down to build themselves up. They didn't attempt to claim credit for my work. They simply believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. As I continued my speech discussing the novel and my writing process, I could see Davis shrinking in his seat, aware that everyone around him now knew the truth. William Foster had moved to a different row, leaving Davis isolated. The narrative he had tried to construct had collapsed completely. When the keynote concluded, I received a standing ovation. As attendees approached for the book signing that followed, many shared their own stories of overcoming discouragement and rejection. The personal connection was more meaningful than any revenge could have been. From my seat at the signing table, I watched Davis attempt to approach several industry contacts, only to be politely rebuffed. The editor, who had been enthusiastic about his book on literary pedagogy, now avoided eye contact. The film producer, who had seemed so interested in his insights, now walked briskly in the opposite direction when Davis approached. Catherine Bennett, the author who had warned me about Davis's tactics, stopped by my table with a satisfied smile. "Masterfully handled," she said. "The English department at Eastwood will be discussing this for years to come." I didn't want to humiliate him, I admitted. I just needed the truth to be known. Sometimes the truth is more devastating than any planned revenge could be. She glanced over at Davis, now standing alone near the exit. "His colleagues are already texting about what you revealed. Apparently, you're not the first student he's treated this way, just the first to speak up with evidence." As the signing continued, Jason approached with news that made my heart soar. "William Foster wants to meet with you privately," he said. "He's interested in having you write the screenplay adaptation yourself. He said, and I quote, 'Her authentic voice is what made the novel special. We need that same voice for the film.'" The validation was overwhelming. Not only had I succeeded as a novelist, but my career was expanding in ways I had never imagined possible. Near the end of the session, Davis finally approached my table. The arrogant professor was gone, replaced by a subdued man who could barely meet my eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "My behavior was inexcusable, both then and now." I studied him, searching for sincerity and finding instead calculation. This wasn't genuine remorse. It was damage control. "I'd like to make things right," he continued. "Perhaps we could issue a joint statement clarifying our past relationship. I could acknowledge my excessive criticism while you could mention any positive aspects of my teaching that might have influenced you." Even now, he was trying to salvage something for himself. I smiled, picked up a copy of my novel, and signed the title page. To Professor Davis, who reminded me that critics are just readers with opinions. Thank you for the motivation. I handed him the book and turned to the next person in line, effectively dismissing him. As he walked away, book in hand, I felt no triumph or satisfaction, only a quiet peace. I had reclaimed my narrative and my power. Later that evening, as I prepared for a dinner with fellow authors, Josephine pulled me aside. "The board just met. They've decided not to include Professor Davis in next year's program," she informed me. Several prominent authors indicated they wouldn't participate if he was invited back. I nodded, understanding the full weight of what had happened. Davis had spent decades building his reputation, positioning himself as a kingmaker in literary circles. In one afternoon, that carefully constructed image had crumbled. But what mattered more was what I had built, a career based on my own voice, my own perseverance, my own truth. As I joined my fellow writers at dinner, I felt lighter than I had in years. The shadow of Davis's judgment no longer followed me. I was exactly where I belonged, not because anyone had given me permission to be there, but because I had earned it despite those who tried to convince me I couldn't. Tomorrow, I would begin work on my second novel, carrying forward not the weight of old criticism, but the confidence of having finally completely proven it wrong.